On April 10, 1912, crowds gathered along the docks of Southampton, England. They had come to see a modern marvel, the largest and most luxurious ocean liner the world had ever seen. Its size alone made it a spectacle. At 883 feet long, it was longer than a typical city block. Its width was nearly 100 feet, making it wider than the average house, and its height was equivalent to a 9-story building, towering over the crowds as it pulled away from the dock. People marveled at the ship's grandeur. It was called the pinnacle of civilization, the epitome of human ingenuity. In fact, the captain himself boasted to reporters that it would take 3 of their ships to sink him. "It's perfectly safe," said the captain. "You can't sink this ship." And these sentiments were echoed by the ship's designer, who claimed that Titanic could withstand any ordinary sea conditions and even survive being hit by an iceberg. No ship could be made to sink, he told reporters. Newspapers around the world picked up the story, dubbing the ship Unsinkable. So when the Titanic set off on its maiden voyage toward New York on April 10th, thousands of people waved goodbye. They did so knowing they were witnessing the start of a new era in travel. Little did they know, this journey would soon become one of the most infamous disasters in maritime history. Over the next few days, the ship made stops in England, Ireland, and France before sailing across the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. For first-class passengers, the trip was pure luxury. Cabins had private promenades overlooking the ocean. Food was delivered by waiters at the touch of a button. Meals in the ship's restaurant were like those found only in fancy hotels. And each evening there was live music and dancing in the ship's lavish ballrooms. Many of the ship's passengers were upper-class Europeans traveling to America for leisure. Others were wealthy Americans returning home after spending the winter in Europe. But not all passengers were so fortunate. On the lower decks lived hundreds of immigrants fleeing poverty or war in Europe or Asia. Their cabins were cramped and dirty, the walls stained with grime, and the bunks infested with bedbugs. They shared toilets and sinks with dozens of other passengers, and often had to wait in line for food. Despite their differences, life on board was good. Most passengers spent their time relaxing, eating, drinking, smoking, and having affairs. By mid-April, Titanic was 4 days into her maiden voyage, and about 400 miles off the coast of the North American continent. During the first few days, the ship had received several warnings of ice in the area from nearby vessels, but nothing had been seen. And so the ship continued on at near top speed. On the night of April 14th, the weather was unusually calm. There was no wind and the temperature was in the 60s. Looking out over the dark, choppy waters, passengers saw nothing but darkness. Passengers and crew alike enjoyed the peacefulness of the evening. In first class, couples waltzed under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Below deck, families played cards by lamplight. But unbeknownst to everyone on board, danger lay just below the surface. Around 11:40 p.m., a lookout spotted an iceberg directly in the ship's path. He rang the bell, alerting the crew. The captain ordered the ship to turn, but it was too late. The Titanic had already struck the iceberg, shaving off the starboard side, slicing open the ship's hull below the waterline. While no one on board knew it at the time, the damage was fatal. Although the hull was small, seawater poured in and the ship began to sink. At first, the crew tried to calm the passengers, assuring them everything was fine. Lifeboats were launched, but there weren't nearly enough to evacuate everyone on board. Within minutes, the ship was half full of water, and people realized there was no hope of rescue. Women and children were loaded into the lifeboats first, but many passengers refused to leave. Some stayed inside listening to the ship's band, as others stood on deck watching the lifeboats disappear into the darkness. The captain maintained order and calm until the very end, sacrificing himself so that others might live. When the ship broke apart, Titanic was almost a cartoon image of itself. The bow pointed skyward at a 45-degree angle while the stern dipped low into the water. The stern rose slowly higher and higher into the air until it seemed to touch the clouds. Then it suddenly dropped downward, and the ship was gone. Of the nearly 2,300 people on board, more than 1,500 died, mostly from hypothermia. The nearby ship, the captain, arrived hours later and rescued 705 survivors. News of the tragedy shocked the world. Newspapers ran stories detailing every aspect of the disaster, from how the ship had been deemed unsinkable to the chaos that had unfolded that night. People mourned the loss of life and criticized the actions of the crew. Many survivors suffered lifelong physical and psychological trauma, and the disaster left deep emotional scars on families back home. Investigations followed the sinking, trying to determine what caused such a modern ship to sink. They discovered that many lifeboats had been scheduled for the same night the Titanic sank, but they were canceled for unknown reasons. It was also discovered that the lookouts had no binoculars, which may have helped spot the iceberg sooner. And finally, there was the question of speed. Why was the ship traveling so fast through an area known for icebergs? Ultimately, the investigation concluded that a series of small mistakes and bad luck had caused the disaster, but they agreed that if the ship had traveled slower, it may have been able to avoid the collision, or at least saved more lives. In the aftermath, laws regarding lifeboats were changed, and maritime safety was reformed. More lifeboats were required on larger ships, and regular safety drills became law. But perhaps the most important change was the requirement that ships carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Though the changes were necessary, they were born out of tragedy, and in the end, it wasn't enough. Even today, the memory of the Titanic haunts us. It reminds us that no matter how powerful we become, there are some things we can't control. It teaches us that sometimes even the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes, and shows us that even in the darkest times, courage and selflessness can shine through. More than a century after the sinking of the Titanic, people still watch movies about it, read books about it, and visit museums dedicated to its memory. But why do we remain fascinated by this tragedy? Perhaps it's because the Titanic represents something more than just a ship that sank. It embodies the dreams and aspirations of the 20th century. It was supposed to usher in an age of prosperity and glamour. Instead, it marked the beginning of a darker era. Or maybe we're drawn to the tragedy because it could have been avoided. If the captain had slowed down, if the lookouts had had binoculars, if there had been enough lifeboats, so many lives would have been saved. But these are all things that could have been, not what actually happened. The Titanic remains a powerful symbol of humanity's potential for greatness and our capacity for tragedy. It's a reminder that no matter how much we accomplish, we must always strive to do better. We must never rest on our laurels, and we must never forget the lessons of the past. So here's to you, Titanic, and may your memory forever remind us of the fragility of life and the importance of never giving up. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.